Y'all ready? Sure? I tell you what, let's stand up. I hate standing alone. You don't have to if you don't want to. I ain't going to throw anything at you. Give me some words there, cuz. I don't know if y'all know these songs or not, but y'all just work through it, push, try, attempt. All right, here we go. Have faith in God when your pathway is lonely. He sees and knows all the way you have trod. Never alone are the least of his children. Have faith in God. Have faith in God. Have faith in God. He's on his throne. Have faith in God. He watches o'er his own. He cannot fail. He must prevail. Have faith in God. Have faith in God. Have faith in God when your prayers are unanswered. Your earnest plea he will never forget. Wait on the Lord, trust his word and be patient. Have faith in God, he'll answer yet. Have faith in God, he's on his throne. Have faith in God, he watches o'er his own. He cannot fail, he must prevail. Have faith in God, have faith in God. I gotta catch my breath. Just hold, give me a minute. There's one person in here to understand what I'm talking about. Y'all ready? Verse 3 is the last one. Y'all ready? Have faith in God, though all else fell about you. Have faith in God, he provides for his own. He cannot fail, though all kingdoms shall perish. He rules, he reigns upon his throne. Have faith in God, he's on his throne. Have faith in God, he watches o'er his own. He cannot fail, he must prevail. Have faith in God, have faith in God. Y'all can sit down if you'd like. I see all y'all tired and stuff. I'm going to start marathon training tomorrow. Y'all ain't going to sit down? That's good. Say, stand up. That's what I'm talking about. They in it. They committed. I like commitment. All right. Here's another new song. Y'all might not ever heard her. Well, anyway. All right. Y'all ready? You got it? Sure? All right. Yes. You sure? There is a name I love to hear. I love to sing its worth. It sounds like music in my ear. The sweetest name on earth. Oh, how I love Jesus. Oh, how I love Jesus. Oh, how I love Jesus. Because he first loved me. It tells me of a Savior's love who died to set me free. It tells me of his precious blood, the sinner's perfect plea. Oh, how I love Jesus. Oh, how I love Jesus. Oh, how I love Jesus. Because he first loved me. Sing it again. Can y'all mean that? Do you now? Sing it loud. Sing it like you mean it. Y'all ready? Here we go. Oh, how I love Jesus. Oh, how I love Jesus. Oh, how I love Jesus. Because he first loved me. Amen.
Don't get to hear enough of those old songs like that. I tell you, when we hit an old song we hadn't sing, I just think about all the years growing up. We sang those, how we sang those songs, and didn't hurt me any, did it? Doesn't mean there's not room for new stuff, and I like a lot of new stuff too. I like for whatever we do to be upbeat, and I don't think we ought to drag out anything that belongs to God. Amen? Sing it out loud and put some heart into it. Well, I want to take some time and get started today. Before I start in Daniel chapter 1, where we'll be going, just a couple of announcements about tomorrow, 6 o'clock. We'll be doing outreach, and I hope you can come, and if you can, join us for that. We try to visit folks who visited here, maybe folks we haven't seen, folks that's been sick. But if you want to come be a part of that, we meet in the fellowship hall at 6 o'clock. And don't forget our food drives this week. If you can bring something for the children's home, non-perishable items, or bring things, particularly candies. If we're trying to use the fall festival as fundraiser for our playground improvements that we're wanting to do. So obviously, if we don't have to go buy a $10 bag of candy, that's $10 that we'll make as a profit. So if you donate that, we'll have enough candies and things to give out during the fall festival. And so anything you can bring toward that this month would be greatly appreciated. Okay? All right. Anything else we need to announce that we didn't state?
Well, the ladies are meeting tomorrow night at 5 o'clock at Burger Grind. For our get-together. And then after that, we're going to drive down to Skate Town.
Yeah.
For a little bit to listen to some music and watch a celebration of older skaters. Not us.
Y'all not skating?
No.
Oh, I was going to sneak in there and film that.
We just watch.
You're just watching. You don't know anybody that's skating or nothing like that? You're just going to watch people fall and hurt themselves, and be like going to a hockey game. You show up and hope a fight breaks out. Or go to watch NASCAR and hope they have a wreck so you can get some entertainment out of it. So I know what y'all doing. I keep an eye on y'all. Okay. So ladies, don't forget that. Men are saving up all their special events till deer season opens up, and then we'll have some special activities around that. Daniel. Who can tell me when the book of Daniel, the events of the Babylonian captivity are taking place? Around the 6th century BC, the 500s actually, 583, in those areas there was more than one carrying away into Babylonian captivity. But we know the finality of that was around, 583. But there were more than one trip where they were taken captive. I called the study tonight, Living Godly Among the Godless. Boy, doesn't that really relate to our world today, kind of where we are and learning to live? And I'm not trying to be negative about that, but just that we do live in I think it's fair to say, a changing world. A changing world. They used to say we were a Christian nation, and then they said we're a post-Christian nation. And now they say we've even moved beyond that to a non-Christian nation, or to at least I forget the other term that was used, but basically say a non-religious nation. And the numbers seem to be moving in that direction when smaller and smaller numbers of younger and younger generations are saying, yes, I'm a follower of Jesus Christ, and unashamed about that. These young men were four that are mentioned in our book of Daniel. We're going to try to cover a chapter each Sunday night. And these young men were brought out of Christian families, Jewish families, but faithful families. They came from well-to-do families. In fact, they were called princes. You'll see in this. It seems like the hand of God was on them. They seemed to use their faith, walk their faith. Their faith was real to them, and they were determined to do what God wanted them to do, no matter what the cost. And they stand out because of that. Does anybody know the reasons why they were taken in judgment? Right. Okay. But as far as the nation, not just these young men, but why was the nation taken to Babylon? What did they do wrong? Disobeying God is a real general sense. There was a lot of idolatry in the land. Of course, disobedience to Sabbath rest, they hadn't observed it for 490 years. Sabbath rest. So if you take that Sabbath rest, you add it up, it's 1/7 of 490 years. And that leads to how many years? 70 years, you might say, they owed God. And that's about how long the Babylonians, they're going to be held captive here. 70 years. And God tells them in this book, He'll tell them, He said, don't try to, don't make any plans to go on vacation. Don't make any plans to go back home. You're not going anywhere till you pay me my 70 years back. 70 years. Your little children are going to get old here. Don't plan to leave. Settle down, build your homes, plant your gardens, and make the best of it. Wow. That's a hard message to observe, isn't it? To learn, to live with. King Hezekiah's sin was another problem for them. That was one of the third reasons why they were there. Isaiah chapter 39, if you want to just hold your hand here in Daniel and turn back to Isaiah chapter 39, it tells us in the first 8 verses kind of what all had happened. Jeremiah also had prophesied that this was going to happen in the century prior to this, in the 7th century. He had prophesied that you're going to fall. If you don't repent, you're going to fall. I hate to say it, but I'm afraid that's a word for America today. If you don't repent, you're going to fall. Verse 1 says in chapter 39 of Isaiah, at that time, Merodach Baladan, the son of Baladan, the king of Babylon, sent letters and presents to Hezekiah, for he heard that he had been sick and had recovered, and Hezekiah was pleased with them and showed them to the houses of the treasures, the silver and the gold, and the spices, the precious ointment, his armory, and all that was found among his treasures. There was nothing in his house or in all the dominion that Hezekiah did not show them. And Isaiah the prophet went to King Hezekiah and said to him, what do these men say, and from where do they come from? And King Hezekiah said, they came to me from a far country, from Babylon. And he said, what have they seen in your house? Hezekiah answered, they have seen all that is in my house. There is nothing among my treasures that I have not shown them. And Isaiah said to Hezekiah, hear the word of the Lord of hosts. Behold, the days are coming, when all that is in your house and what your fathers have accumulated unto this day shall be carried to Babylon. Nothing shall be left, says the Lord. And they shall take away some of your sons who will descend from you and whom you will beget. And they shall be eunuchs in the palace of the king of Babylon. And Hezekiah said to Isaiah, the word of the Lord, which you have spoken, is good. For he said, at least there will be peace and truth in my days. Now think about that. A king said, well, as long as I have peace, I don't care about all that in the future. I'm just worried about my days. I'm not concerned about what happens in the future. How ignorant of a statement that was. Why have you done that? You've boasted. You've boasted about what all you have. And you've shown that. And because of your poor leadership, this nation's going to fall. He talked about them being eunuchs in the palace of the king of Babylon. Now, a eunuch has two There are two definitions of a eunuch. A eunuch is someone who serves as a magistrate, a leader, and we know these young boys did do that. They served in positions of respect sometimes. Sometimes they were imprisoned for some of their thoughts and actions. But a eunuch is also someone who's forced into a sexual arrangement, a homosexual arrangement. Someone who is... let's say they were transgendered against their will. I don't know if that's exactly what happened, if that happened with Daniel and Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego and all of them. But that's what I want you to know what a eunuch is. I don't want to just assume that we pass a word in the Bible and don't know what that means. So sometimes it was in a position of responsibility. Sometimes it had that negative understanding. In the book of Daniel, here's what I'd like to do is I'd like to take each of these sections and read the verses as we come to them in our outline today. Number one, this was a different world. A different world. Verses 1 and 2 says it this way. In the 3rd year of the reign of Jehoiakim, king of Judah, Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, came to Jerusalem and besieged it. And the Lord gave King Jehoiakim, king of Judah, into the hands, and some of the articles of the house of God, which he carried into the land of Shinar, which is Babylon, to the house of his God. And he brought the articles into the treasure house of his God. And so here we see, basically Nebuchadnezzar took those things that Isaiah said he was going to take back there. Isaiah said there's coming a time that all these treasures you're boasting about, Nebuchadnezzar's going to own them. And here we see in the first 2 verses he did. These young men had suffered. And I think it's fair for us to say today, these young men were suffering for the sins of their forefathers. You with me? We think sometimes today our sin is just our business. And I'm here to tell you, your sin's not just your business. Your sin can affect your family, the generations that follow you. Your sin is something that can be carried on. It doesn't just affect you. I think about, people like the guy who took the garments when they went into Jericho, and he stole those things. He stole the Babylonian garments that were there, and the gold and the silver and things. And he came out and he said, and basically they said, what'd you do with it? You wasn't supposed to take anything. And he had taken it and he had hid it. And you remember what they said? He said, who was going to pay for his sin? This man made this sin. This leader of his family made this sin. But you know who died because of it? His whole family and his animals. Everything he owned died because of this one man's sin. Don't ever think that your sin's just your business. It's only going to affect you. It can affect a lot of people. And so, as we look at this today, I want to focus just on 3 things there about this different world. First of all, it was a world of government depravity. It was a world of government depravity. They didn't care about, just like we talked about the eunuchs a while ago, there was all kind of perversions. They didn't believe in holiness in the sense of God. There was different thoughts, different thinking. It's all about conquering. We don't know all the details today, but when you take a godless nation and they go into a different nation that may have godly beliefs and values, I think of what's going on in Israel today. They're just pulling people out of the houses, raping women, killing them, the children, little babies. They're finding little babies that they shot and killed. We're living in a world where the same type thing goes on all around us. Don't think for a moment if some of these depraved nations could come into our nation, they wouldn't try to enforce their lifestyles, their beliefs, their morality on us. So this different world was a world of government depravity. There was wickedness in high places. You constantly read about in the book of Daniel about their parties, their drunkenness, and all the things that's going on. So much so that God just breaks through in a vision I love that one where he sees the handwriting on the wall. And he says, you have been weighed in the balances and found wanting. And that's God saying that. And the world doesn't like to think that they could ever be weighed in the balances and found wanting by God. But the fact is, we could be. Second thing, the world of the king's cruelty. This king knew about cruelty. He knew what it meant to punish people. There was great, if I took time and went through examples of all this today, we'd never finish. But I want to say it was a time of the king's cruelty. They made rulings, they made decisions, and it was carried out immediately. And it was the world of God's sovereignty. Never forget that. Never forget that even in a world where God allows things to happen, God was using Babylon as a tool to punish the people that He loved. Never forget that. God could have prohibited this. Are you right? Am I right about that? I mean, God could have stopped it. But He loved Israel too much to stop it. Does that make sense? God might love us too much to stop us facing some kind of hardship. Just like you. You go walk outside and your kid's playing in the street. Guess what? You're going to say, I love you too much to let you do that. That you're going to remember to never do that again. But I'm going to put a little bit of pain on you, but if a car hits you out there, it's going to be a lot of pain. And God's saying, I would rather you have a little bit of pain and learn your lesson than not learn it. So God allows them in His sovereignty to have a little bit of pain. No matter where you go, God is sovereign. What does that mean? That means God is the ultimate decision maker. Whether He will, and He's the ultimate power there. Some people are going to say, well, why did God let that happen? Why did God allow that? Well, friends, God allows a bunch in this old world. He wants us to see and taste good and evil, wickedness, righteousness. And then He wants us to choose righteousness. You see, if you're forced to be righteous, that's not righteousness. It's only real. Like if you were forced to love somebody, if you were said you're going to have to love God, that's my big argument with the Calvinist movement today, is that they're saying, well, you have to love God. If God picks you, you have to love God. I don't have to do anything. But if I'm forced to love God, is that real love? That's not real love. Real love is something that's given, not taken. And so here we see in the sovereignty, never confuse the sovereignty of God. Sovereignty of God means God's there, and if something's going on that you don't like or you're not fond of, just know this. It's happening because God's allowed it to happen for a reason. Maybe you're just there to learn something. Maybe it's nothing about you. Maybe it's about somebody else. Maybe it's about the sins of your forefathers, which Daniel, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego are going through. It's not because of what these boys did that they're in Babylon. It's because of Isaiah and Hezekiah and King Hezekiah and all the things that we've seen. So understand that just because things aren't going your way doesn't mean God's not sovereign over that situation. Sovereignty means God sees it, God can. And God may be taking, like, you ever take pieces of a puzzle and you got like 1,000 pieces of puzzle on the table and you're trying to put them together one piece at a time? That big puzzle, you don't see it, but God sees it. He knows where every piece goes. And He's going to put it there at the right time to bring about the right purpose at the right time. That's what we have to, that's what it means to be sovereign. That doesn't mean God just goes down through before the foundations of the world, God just said, you're going to get saved, you're going to get lost, you're going to be saved, lost, heaven, hell, heaven, hell, heaven, hell, just wherever you want to go. You don't have to say, so I'm just picking you. No, that's not. And there's a lot of teachings out there today that teach that. But I'm going to tell you something. I'd have trouble serving a God who just flipped a coin to decide who'd go to heaven and hell. I'd have a hard time believing that God would just, for no reason. And I know there's a lot of different beliefs. But you know, if God loved me, let's say, for example, God saved me, but yet He sent my children to hell, never gave them a chance to be saved. How would you feel about that? Never loved them, never gave them a chance to be saved. See, I just don't think God takes it that far. And I think some people don't take it that far. Even if they're Calvinists in their beliefs, they don't take it that far. But there are some out there that are radical about that. And they just say, you don't have any say-so. But anyway, moving on. That's the world that they were moving up in. Number 2 in your outline. Well, I didn't tell you. When I said God was sovereign in this world, the Babylonians had their own sovereign that they followed. In Daniel chapter 2 and verse 2, just in that next chapter, basically you see what they worshiped. You see how they worshiped. It says, verse 2 says, then the king gave the commandment to call the magicians, the astrologers, the sorcerers, and the Chaldeans to tell the king his dream. What was their God? What was their faith? What did they look to for wisdom? Sorcery, magic, astrology. They read their horoscopes every day. They followed the stars and believed that their stars were going to tell them something about themselves that day. And that was the God in Babylon. That was where the wisdom, the faith was at in Babylon. Okay? So I want to say that just so that you understand the world, the difference in beliefs, the faith, what carried Daniel and his friends and what carried the Babylonian government. The second thing, these were distinctive young men. Not only was it a different world, they were distinctive young men. They stood out. Verses 3 and 4 tells us a lot about who they were. It says that then the king instructed Ashpenaz, the master of the eunuchs, to bring some of the children of Israel and some of the king's descendants and some of the nobles, young men, in whom there was no blemish. Notice what it said about them? King's descendants. What did we say about, right back over there in Isaiah 39 a while ago, about Hezekiah's descendants? This is some of his descendants. All right? Young men, it says some king descendants, and some of the nobles, young men whom there was no blemish, good looking, gifted in all wisdom, possessing knowledge and quick to understand, and they had the ability to serve in the king's palace, in whom they might teach the language and literature of the Chaldeans. They were the best and the brightest. They were in the advanced classes in school. You see, they didn't have to just run with everybody else. They were advanced, and they had all the benefits of life. Let's think about it for just a moment. What were these guys? What was unique about them? You see, God's ways was not going to be their Babylonian ways. And they were going to do everything they could to change these guys, to keep the abilities that they had, but yet change the information, change their thinking, change how they looked at life. That's what the devil wants to do today. He wants to change how you look at life. If you were raised in Christian, if you're a committed Christian, you follow the Lord, and you believe that, you know, God is on His throne, and you believe Jesus is Lord, and if the Chinese, I've just used them for example, one of the world's powers today, if they came in here and took us over, I'm here to tell you one of the first things they do is they want to change how you think about things. That's one of the first things. If they can control your thinking, they can control your life. Okay? Physically, these guys were strong, handsome, good-looking, it said. Socially, they had experience. They were well-liked. Mentally, they were keen, sharp, well-educated. Spiritually, they were devoted to God and God's ways. Now, in these verses, we see that they had promising futures. That's in your outline there. They had promising futures, didn't they? You could just see from where they came from. Socially, everybody expected them to be the kings and princes of the future. These were the sharp guys. They knew what was going on. And second of all, they had potential wisdom. I mean, these guys were they were wise. They were only going to grow wiser. They were only going to be used of God to attain wisdom. But they didn't like where they got their knowledge. They didn't like where they got their wisdom. So they wanted to try to replace it with astrology and their way of viewing wisdom. Thirdly, let's look at the third thing. They had determined wills, verses 5 through 7. They had determined wills. Verse 5 says, and the king appointed for them a daily provision of the king's delicacies and of the wine which he drank. You can imagine that was the best wine, right? That was the good stuff. And 3 years of training for them, so that at the end of that time they might serve before the king. Now from among those, the sons of Judah were Daniel. His name became Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. And that was their Hebrew names. To them the chief of the eunuchs gave names. He gave Daniel the name of Belshazzar. To Hananiah, Shadrach. To Mishael, Meshach. And to Azariah, Abednego. Let's pause right there at verse 7. They wanted to change them in 3 ways at least. And by the way, when you look at what they were, they're changing their names, but yet they really wanted to change their hearts. And that's where the daily provisions of the king's delicacies, they wanted to spoil them. They wanted to brainwash them, even maybe develop a little drinking problem. And so we see that they were out to change them. They wanted to change them, first of all, internally. They wanted to change them on the inside. You know, if you change a person on the inside, in their heart, they wanted to change what they were passionate about. What better way than to give them a little bit to drink? Make the parties entertaining. Make it so that they enjoy this Babylonian lifestyle. And here we see they set out to change them internally. Right at the end of verse 4 tells us more about how they were going to change them when he talked about how they would teach the language and the literature of the Chaldeans. That's the part that was internal as well as their thinking. But number 2, he wanted to change their interest. What they were interested in. So he brought out the party, all the party things and all the events, the fun. He changed their atmosphere from being in prison to being in the palace. And number 3, he wanted to change their integrity. He wanted to change everything about them, even changing their names. And let's take this and let's talk about the names just a moment. Here's what Daniel means. You might want to write these down. Daniel in Hebrew meant God is my judge. His name was changed to Belshazzar. Belshazzar means Baal protects my life. Baal, not God, Baal protects my life. Every day they hollered him, hey Belshazzar. They're saying, hey, one who is a servant of Baal, one who is protected by Baal, come over here. Every day. That was figured into his circle of events. Hananiah, the second one that's mentioned, in Hebrew means Jehovah is gracious. Jehovah is gracious. His name was changed to Shadrach. Means I'm under the command of the moon god. I'm under the command of the moon god. Hey buddy, your God's not gracious. It's the moon god gave you everything you got. You understand they had many gods. So you're a servant of the moon god. All the blessings you have, all this wine you can drink and the meat you can eat from the king's table, all those things, that's because of the moon god. It's not because of your God. Look what your God got you. Your God got you taken to another country. You're just lucky we gave you to the moon god. and all your blessings come from Him. Did it work like that? That's how they work it. Number 3, Mishael. In Hebrew, it means who is like God. In other words, it's just a word, a name of praise. Who can be like God? Nobody can be like God. He stands out. Mishael's name was changed to Meshach. Now guess what? Guess what Meshach means? It means who is like Aku, another one of their gods. Who is like Aku? Hey, your God got you a captive, a prisoner, a slave. Look what your God did. All the things you have, it's because Aku has blessed you. You need to worship Aku. You need to listen to Aku. They had many gods. Azariah in Hebrew means Jehovah is my helper. Jehovah is my helper. But his name was changed to Abednego, the servant of Nego, another god. You're the servant of Nego. You got all this. You're sleeping in a nice bed. We got fans around you. Boy, we're going to take care of you and all the food you can eat and all the wine you can drink. You need to thank Nego for that. Not God. Not your God. Not Jehovah. Your helper got you sent to prison. Babylon thought that these name change was going to change everything about these boys, because every day they'd be called upon by those names. Thought it would change them internally. It would change their interest. It would change eventually. Eventually they would compromise their integrity and listen to the gods of Babylon. And last of all, these boys had decisions to make. They had decisions to make. They had to make decisions about their life, about whether they were going to stay with the God who they'd been told every day. Remember, they said they're going to be in a 3-year school. 3 years of brainwashing them. And he said, every day, we're going to call you by that name. We're going to remind you who you belong to. We're going to remind you what God's been good to you. We're going to remind you of how good we've been to you. And you're going to have to decide whether or not you're going to stay with your God, your failing God that got you sent here as a prisoner, or whether or not you're going to follow the God that we've basically assigned to you. Okay? There were 3 types of decisions in these verses. There's a lot of verses 8 to 21. So let me just see the first one. Verse 8 comes from the first one. It was going to be a heart decision. It was going to be a heart decision. They had to decide in their heart who they were going to follow. It says in verse 8, but Daniel purposed in his heart that he would not defile himself with the portion of the king's delicacies. Underline that little part there. He purposed in his heart. He determined in his heart, I will not compromise. If they storm in this if some other country takes us over one day, or if they rush in here and terrorists say, hey, if you're going to stay faithful to God, you're going to die. We're going to shoot you right now. Are you going to turn your back on God? Deny God, and we'll let you go. That's what they faced all through the first 2 or 3 centuries of the AD, of the time after Christ. I mean, they'd take these guys who were doing nothing but maybe William Tyndale, good example, this week was a big deal. It was a big thing on his anniversary of his death. All he did was put the Bible in English so people could read it. And they killed him. And they gave him a choice in the court, in the spiritual court hearing that he got put on by the Catholic Church. They said, if you'll stop translating the Bible into English, we'll let you go. But if you keep putting the Bible in English where everyday people can read it and find out truth for themselves, we're going to kill you. And they did kill him. I think he was one of the ones that was tied up and burned. I can't remember all the different ways that people were killed. Some were hanged. Some were cut in half. All kind of different things. But I'm saying to you that it's a heart decision that you and I have to make, that we're not going to compromise with the world. Daniel is one of those who speaks out even in verse, as these verses go on, and he talks about we're not going to defile ourselves. We're just not going to do it. They purposed in their heart that they weren't going to do it. A second thing is it was not only a heart decision, but I think it's fair to say it was an humble decision. They had to humble themselves to say, we would rather die than do what you want us to do. You don't have a lot of pride when you say that. When you say, hey, I'm God's no matter what. It talks about in the last part of that verse, he said, we don't want to defile ourselves with the portion of the king's delicacies or with the wine which he drank. Therefore, he requested of the chief of the eunuchs that he might not defile himself. Now, God had brought Daniel in the favor of the goodwill of the chief of the eunuchs. You know, you've just been around old Daniel and him for a while. I imagine you hadn't been around them too long. You said, man, these guys are different. These guys are different. They've been with God. You remember they said that about a number of people in the Bible days. I said, man, you can tell they've been with God. And here that's what's obvious. He had found favor with this chief of the eunuchs. And the chief of the eunuchs said to Daniel, I fear my lord the king who has appointed your food and drink. Why? For why should he see your faces look worse than the young men who are of your age? And then you would endanger my head. You're going to get me in trouble. Daniel said to the servant whom the chief of the eunuchs had set over Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, Azariah, he said, please test your servants for 10 days. Let them give us vegetables to eat and water to drink. And then let our appearance be examined before you and the appearance of the young men who eat the portion of the king's delicacies, and as you see fit, and so deal with your servants. In other words, he said, let's test it for 10 days. Let us just eat the things that we're used to eating, that fit into our faith. And he said, if we're okay, if we look okay, you're going to be okay. Depends on how we look. If we look famished, if we look starving, if we're not doing well, then we'll have to reevaluate. He knew what God was going to do. So he consented with them in this matter and tested them 10 days. At the end of the 10 days, their features appeared better and fatter in flesh than all the young men who ate the portion of the king's delicacies. Now, it doesn't tell us who all these young men are, but I'm pretty sure that there was a multitude of these young men who were Jewish that had been brought into captivity, gave in. I'm sure they said, man, I'll take a steak and baked potato. Forget the peas. I'm not worried about the vegetables. He said, I'm not worried. And I can imagine some of them saying, hey, if I'm going to have a more comfortable life, I'll do it. Whatever, bring me, man, load the table up. I'll eat it all. And so here he says, but it's amazing how these young men who were basically, it was on a particular diet, he said they took away their portion of delicacies and the wine that were able to drink and gave them vegetables. It was a type of vegetarian type diet, something that was based upon their fasting that they had, based upon the diet that they felt God had led them to take, and something that they had been living by for a period of time. It says in verse 17, I'll come back to it next, about the 4 young men. God gave them knowledge in verse 17 and skill in all literature and wisdom, and Daniel had understanding in visions and dreams. It was an humble decision. They had to say, we're willing to take less than the delicacies of the king's table. It's believed that some type of, again, a vegetable type diet that they had been following as Jews was what they followed. You know, there's a lot of things we eat that don't follow the Old Testament dietary laws. Now, according to the New Testament, we know that Peter, when he said things like, well, God, we don't eat that. You know, he was told to eat the things that came to him in the vision. And, you know, some of you sitting here probably wondering why can't we eat catfish? Why can't we eat shrimp? Well, the Bible forbids it in the Old Testament diet. Why? Why do you think? So says the empty hole in the back of the wall. Y'all heard the sound come from the empty hole in the back of the wall, right? Okay. Good word, Daniel. Yeah, I mean, iodine was a big deal. They were traveling, when they got those dietary laws, they were wandering in the wilderness for 40 years. And these were special dietary laws for them for health reasons. There was a lot of reasons. There's a lot of things, you know. Now, why not eat horses? We eat cows. Why not horses? Well, you don't have a split hoof. That's one of the things about it, you know, be an animal with a split hoof. And why God said that, plus horse meat probably doesn't taste as good as cow. I don't know. But anyway, I've heard that. Make good glue, though. But anyway, we think about these things. There's a purpose. There's a reason. But in the New Testament, God said, I'm not holding you to those dietary laws anymore. Thank God. With shrimp and crawfish, man, I'd hate to have to follow those dietary laws. But we think about that today, and God doesn't have the same requirements. That's in the book of Acts, by the way, if you want to look that up, when the vision came down to Peter and God told him to take some of those things that were forbidden in the Old Testament and kill them and eat them. And Peter said, no way, God, I don't eat that stuff. And God says, what I've made clean, I've made clean. Go eat it. You know, and the point about how he makes us clean is the emphasis. The last thing, let's fill in that last blank, the honorable decisions. These were honorable decisions that these boys had to make. Were they going to honor God in the decisions? Verse 17, these 4 young men, who gave them knowledge, God gave them knowledge and skill and literature and wisdom, and Daniel understanding of visions and dreams. Now at the end of the days, when the king had said that they should be brought in, the chief of the eunuchs brought them in before Nebuchadnezzar, and the king interviewed them, and among them all, none was found like Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, Azariah. And therefore, they served before the king, in the king's court. And in all matters of wisdom and understanding about which the king examined them, he found them 10 times better than all the magicians and astrologers who were in all of his realm. And Daniel continued unto the first year of King Cyrus. Well, it's kind of an introductory chapter there of where we are, how these young men get to be so famous. Well, you see, they made an honorable decision. They were going to honor God even in every way possible, even in their dietary menus, if you will. They were going to honor God. Maybe you and I don't have all the dietary menus today that they had in the Old Testament days. I'll just throw this out there because people say you fat people never always preach about gluttony, you know. But and I will say that's something we should be concerned. But define that for me. Show me in the Bible what the perfect weight is. I don't know. You know, I always fall back on my famous verse that says, the righteous shall eat of the fat of the land. So I don't know. That's what I always go back to, that verse right there, you know. But how important it is. But we should know what is unhealthy, especially with the knowledge that we have today about foods and things like that. And we should just be wise and not do things that would hinder us being able to minister for God. Not do things that get in the way. You know, food can become a god to you. Can become something that's more important to you than serving God. It becomes an idol. And so in our lives, we just need to make sure that we don't do things that interfere with our relationship with God. I forget where I was going with that, but the point being that these guys, we do need to watch. I think we do know that there are some things today are healthier than other things. And I just think we need to be wise about things like that. These guys showed wisdom, even with their diet and what they ate. And so I don't want to leave that without looking like, well, the preacher didn't say nothing about what we eat. But I don't want us to get into the Old Testament dietary laws either, because I don't believe we're not under that authority of some things back in the Old Testament, that if God has cleaned it in the New Testament, and we do know that he did that about the food. In other words, it was for a particular time in their lives. But I do believe this. I do believe if God told them that it's healthier back there, it's probably healthier today. If they're wandering in the wilderness and that God tells them there's a certain way they ought to eat, stay away from not have to have as many medical problems, it's probably wise. It's probably a pretty good diet. Probably a pretty good diet. Me being diabetic today, I understand the values of a vegetarian lifestyle. It's definitely a benefit to, I don't, by the way, I'm not vegetarian. You can probably tell that, right? I mean, if it ain't got blood running through it, I ain't eating it. No, I'm joking, but it is there's health benefits to that lifestyle. Doesn't mean that's the only way you can do things. God lets us, again, that's another area where we have some choices to make about that. Okay? Any thoughts or comments before we conclude this chapter? Anybody? Outstanding young men. That's where we are. Now we're going to begin to see in the next chapter how God begins to use them. You don't see a lot of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego from this point on. And the reason is their ministries were different. As we said up here, that Daniel's ministry was more along the lines of doing dreams and visions, and that seems to be a lot of what's in this book, dreams and visions. And so Daniel's called on a lot more, whereas the other young men were called for different wisdom. How did it say it? God gave these young men knowledge and skills and all literature and wisdom, which seems to be where the other three leaned, and Daniel's understanding was deeper into visions and dreams. That's why you'll see him mentioned a lot more by himself than others, because that's what a lot of the ministry was. Okay? No comments? Well, I hope you enjoyed it. I tell you, just studying the names of these four people and how they got those names and what the changed names were tells you a lot about the intentions of the government there.
Do you think that if they changed the names for like us, that we could understand them better?
No.
God knew what.
No. No, it didn't have anything to do with us. It changed the names because they wanted them to see that they're now named after a pagan god in Babylon, not the Hebrew gods. That's why their names were changed. To change their loyalties, to change their religious beliefs. And that didn't work for them. Not at least on these four. Okay? Yeah, they do. Yeah, particularly if they get heavy into Islam or something like that, they'll take a Muslim name. Yeah, that has a different meaning. That's right. Thanks for bringing that out. All right.